Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be updating the whole front line, starting with Kherson and finishing off with the Lyman counteroffensive. So starting off in Kherson, we see that there are reports of fighting around Pravdine, as well as Bervinak, Seleni Hai, Ternovi Podi, as well as Lyubomirivka, according to Ukraine War Mapper. And that means that the Ukrainians have continued their offensive operations in the Kherson region despite the troop buildup, so they are now conducting offensives with those in these areas. According to Ukraine War Mapper, Oleksandrivka and other villages in this vicinity is under Ukrainian control. However, I've seen no confirmation of the Ukrainians controlling Oleksandrivka, but I've seen Russian confirmation that the Russians are still in control of it, so I'm putting that as Russian control. Further northeast towards the center of the counteroffensive, the Ukrainians are fighting at Novohereshne, as well as Mala Seydumenucha and Bruskinsky, while the Russians are counterattacking at Kostrumka, Shashlive, and Besimene, where they are trying to capture it from the Ukrainians as they are trying to push the Ukrainians back to the river line, while the Ukrainians are trying to take control of these key points to expand the river bank they have on the other side, as well as taking control of this road that the Russians are using to resupply their forces in the north. And that's it for the Kherson update. Then looking at Zaporizhia, there are reports of fighting at Poltavka and Melenivka by the Russian forces, also according to Ukraine War Mapper. This means that the Russians are trying to get closer to Holyaripole. They previously tried to storm the city, but then realized they probably need to storm it from multiple directions to get proper results. So they pulled back and are attacking from the east through these smaller villages, allowing them to push westwards and attack it from multiple directions. Further up north, there's also reports of fighting around Selenopole. This is most likely for the Russians trying to take control of this road as well. If they connect with from the south towards the north, they'll be able to connect this road here. Further east, the Ukrainians are trying to take back Piechistivka to take control of this highway, allowing them to transport troops throughout this area. And moving on to the Siversk front, we see that the Russians are trying to attack Vesele, Yakovlivka. They have taken Bilohorivka, and they are still fighting around Spirne. And this is also according to Rybar mapping, and this is according to War Mapper by the pro-Ukrainian source. Moving on to the Lyman front, the southern area has not advanced since last night. There's still the same fighting ongoing around Turske, and there's no news around Triprova other than that the Russians didn't have any forces defending here. As for Yampil, they're still fighting us here as well. There's no advances either. However, the Ukrainians managed to take control of Novoselivka and advance onwards to Derilove, which means that they have crossed this river line and are now fighting around Derilove, as well as taking Sereshne and are now fighting at Shendryholove as well. So they are advancing here in the west, as well as in the north, where they've taken Selena Dolina, as well as Nove, which allows them to fight further south towards Kolodziesi. And we'll most likely see the Ukrainians try to connect a attacking force here towards Stavki, as well as southwest towards Derilove to encircle the Russian forces at Shendryholove. There's also the possibility that the Russians are slowly falling back towards Lyman, so that they are able to concentrate their forces in one area, as it seems that the Ukrainians are outnumbering them with how many areas they are attacking from, while the Russians are just trying to hold as many villages as possible. This will allow them to fall back their forces one village by one, which allows them to center their forces in these specific areas like Stavki, Serishne, Torske, Lyman, and Drobyshev, as these are the most important ones, and it will create a circular defensive line for the Russians to hold on to, which will allow them to essentially have an area to operate in, and also to keep control of this road, which will eventually allow the Russians to push the Ukrainians back out of the southern area across the river line and resupply their forces, because this is the weakest link of the Ukrainian army, but also one of the most important areas, which means that the Russians will try to focus here as it is close to Crimea, which will allow them to conduct counteroffensives here in the south, and eventually they'll want to retake control. This is why we see the Ukrainians try to connect these two areas to pour more troops into this weak area, which they need to take Yampil for. So the Ukrainians are focusing on Yampil and Torske, while the Russians are most likely trying to build up a force around Crimea to push the Ukrainians out of the south to allow them to have a safe passage between Lyman and Crimea. And finally, Pisky-Radkivsky has been taken by the Ukrainians as well, and according to some reports, this whole area to the north is completely undefended, which means that the Ukrainians could essentially advance towards Siversk from the south and take control of this whole Oskil river line. But I think they are waiting until they have encircled Lyman, which will allow them to relocate some forces further up north, rather than focusing all the forces here in the south. If they push now, then there will be the risk that the Russians will conduct a counterattack, and they would break free the siege, which the Ukrainians don't want. So they are focusing their forces here until they have proper control of Lyman. And finally, the results of the referendum have come out. Of course, this is a very suspicious referendum, considering that the Russians have control of this area and have soldiers with guns walking around. And there could also be some truth to it, because these are the ones who started the civil war and wanted to go away from Ukraine, especially in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. However, it is still considered an invalid referendum according to international law and against the UN Charter. However, these are the results nonetheless, as Russia, they always put their own law above international law. The Luhansk People's Republic has a 98.42% yes, Donetsk 99.23% yes, and Zaporizhia 93.11%, and Kherson 87.05% yes. Which means that according to Russia, all 4 regions want to become a part of Russia, and that also means that they will eventually become part of Russia according to Russian law, not international law, similar to Crimea. And this also means that whenever in the future, as soon as they have been incorporated into the Russian Federation, the Ukrainians conduct attacks similarly to what we see in Lyman and Kherson, then the Russians will take that as an attack on Russia, and they will most likely respond with some kind of escalation to escalate the war and use more forces, maybe a full mobilization, and who knows what they will be using. However, they will most likely escalate the conflict once they have completely incorporated these southern regions into the Russian Federation according to Russian law. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.